Hello everyone and welcome to the latest Handyman in the field. I'm Dustin and today we are doing something a little bit different. Rather than giving you some advice on something that has happened to me, I'm going to be moving forward with kind of like different specific topics and then trying to do a rotation of these topics. So this time around we're going to start a new one, which is a story video. So I'm going to tell you a story about a job that almost cost me money. And it's definitely not my biggest job, and it wasn't the hardest job. It was more of a scenario that happened that I made a couple of bad assumptions. I did not get the right information, and then in turn did not provide the correct information. So it was a lot of mistakes that I made on my part that I needed to fix in order to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So the biggest thing is, it all starts with a customer call. Customer contacts you, says they need to get something done. So to just give you a little bit of a background behind this. So I've talked about this in some of my earlier videos. When I started out, I had a lot of customers find me through the Home Depot Pro referral. And basically what that is if you go into Home Depot, let's say you walk up to the painting desk and say, I'm looking for someone to help me paint. They actually have a system in place where you as a contractor can input your name. They background check you, verify that you have insurance, and then basically from there they will ensure that you are a qualified person based off of the fact that you have insurance and you have a background check. And then what'll happen is, depending on your location or that Home Depot's location, they'll give that customer, it'll be one of two things that happens. Either one, they give them a printout of 3 contractors that meet the qualifications for whatever it is that they're asking to do. And when I say meet the qualifications, it's a very loose interpretation of that, because essentially all it is when you sign up for a pro referral account, there's a bunch of different types of jobs that you can say you can accomplish. You just check the boxes of things that you can do or your business can do. In most cases, it's just individuals. By checking that box, that is your qualification. You're saying that you can perform the work. So what'll happen is, let's say the customer is looking for someone to paint some shutters. So if you happen to have posted that, or check that box of, shutters, shutter maintenance or shutter replacement or painting, your name might pop up on the list. So if they give them a printout, and again, this was from 4 years ago, so things might have changed drastically since then, but I remember distinctly there was customers who had a printout, and the printout had my picture and then the little blurb that I had about me, and then it just said some of the areas that I performed work in. And then you would see another blurb with another headshot. You had to have a picture associated with your account. But the whole idea was that you were telling Home Depot what you could do, and they were trying to link you up with customers. Home Depot didn't get anything out of this in the sense of you don't pay them for the referrals. The way it typically works is, as you actually as you buy things from Home Depot, you rack up points. These points can then translate into leads. Now, the first option is the customer gets that printout. They have the ability then to call you. The other one is when someone submits a request online or in stores, but I saw this mostly happen online, where when you're checking out and you're purchasing something, it gives you the option of need a pro to help you install it, and you click that button, and basically it just then puts all of that customer's information into a lead, which then gets sent over to the contractor. So this is all a roundabout way of saying I had a lot of customers in the very beginning that initially found me through Home Depot. It was fruitful for a very long time. I ended up stopped using it only because the amount of leads coming in can be overwhelming if you're a handyman, because of how many different types of things that you do. At the same time, it can be extremely beneficial as well, because you always have stuff coming in. So to give you a background, this customer that I'm specifically referring to, she had found me through Home Depot. I had done a couple of minor things for her. Let's say at this point I had been out there 3 different trips. Initially, when I first started going out there, she would have me out there probably once in the spring, once in the fall. She'd give me a small list of things that needed to get done, and I would get it done. Now, the important thing to note is that when I started, my pricing structure was very different than it is now and as it was a couple years ago when this situation occurred. My pricing structure in the very beginning was, if you gave me a list, I gave you an hourly rate and I worked and did the hourly rate. My hourly rate at that time, I believe, might have been $90 when I had started working for her. And I would do anything. I would replace a faucet. I would replace garbage disposal, install a light, install or a power wash. I did a variety of different things for this customer. So let's get to the story at hand, though. So what happened was she calls and says that she has a faucet that needs to be replaced. Pretty straightforward, no issues. Another issue that she needed resolved was she had a Google Nest doorbell, and she couldn't figure out how to get it off in order to charge it. So that was another real simple, easy thing. She had a smoke detector that needed to be replaced that was too high up for her to get to. And the last thing was she had some quarter round around her baseboards that needed to be just nailed in because it wasn't ever nailed in, or I can't remember the exact situation, but essentially that's what happened. So as far as it sounds, this is all straightforward. In my mind, I'm sitting here thinking this is probably going to take maybe 2 hours. Now the catch is she was on the very edge of my service area, about 45 minutes away. My service area now is much smaller. However, back then, I was not as adamant about where my service area ended. Or I should say before I started working for her. So if she contacted me about something, because she was an existing customer, I always made sure to make a point to get over there. The problem is that when you start to get in the mindset of making exceptions for your new rules, so let's say you've narrowed your service area, but this customer is grandfathered in, you already going to have that thing in the back of your head about, oh man, this is such a long drive. Why did I agree to do this? You're already going to be slightly frustrated about the fact that you're driving further than you normally would, because that's not something that you would typically do now. So that's already a problem. You already are creating a certain level of stress by grandfathering customers into scenarios. Now, if it's a customer that's not a problem, you kind of like relieve that stress. This customer was always very accommodating. Not that I had a lot of issues. The only problem that I ever really had with her as a whole was she had a very like tight schedule when it came to things. Because while she was retired and was at home, she did have to drive a family member to dialysis on a regular basis. So it had to be after that family member was at dialysis, and it needed just to be like worked into the schedule. The issue was that based off of the work that she had and her schedule, she typically wanted to schedule after 12:30. The problem is that's dead center in the middle of the day. And if you understand from any of my other videos, I've talked about how I structure things. Smaller jobs, I tend to try to push towards the front of the day and then use the larger amount of time at the end of the day for a bigger job. Nowadays, I can kind of stack a couple of smaller jobs together in one day, but the problem becomes, how do you manage those small jobs if something comes up unexpected? There's some foreshadowing for you if you haven't figured that out. But yeah, basically what happened was as I got there, obviously there was that little stress of having to drive a little bit further than normal, or normal at that point, but the customer was always very nice, always very appreciative. Her husband is a vet. She's a retired nurse. So the thing is, like, those are the type of customers I love helping them out. But what ended up happening was everything was moving straight forward. There was no real issues. The light or the smoke detector went fine. The trim went fine. The Ring doorbell went fine. I made the mistake of leaving the faucet for the last task that I needed to complete at her house. And when I ended up getting underneath the sink, there's a couple of problems that already arose. One, she did not remove everything from under the sink. Now, that's not like a game changer, but it's just, like a simple thing that customers really should think about doing whenever they are having someone needing to work under the sink. We shouldn't have to show up and then have to remove all of that stuff because it takes time. We also have no idea how the stuff is going to go back. So if we take it out, the expectation sometimes is that we put it back. Well, we don't know how your stuff is organized. So what I typically ask when I know I'm going to be under somebody's sink is, can you please make sure that you remove all the stuff from the underneath the sink ahead of time so that way we can do it. Now, if you get there and they forgot, it's not a big deal. But I will say, if I take it out, I don't typically put it back in. And that's just because I don't know exactly how it goes back in there. And I don't want to create some sort of unknown stress for the customer because I messed up how they have their stuff organized. So first problem was that I had to take all the stuff out. There wasn't a small amount of stuff. There was a large amount of stuff. Second problem, it was a very, very tight space. The type of cabinet that it was it had 2 doors and a dividing point in the middle. It was not a very wide cabinet, so there wasn't a lot of space. In addition to that, so saying that, as you know, I'm a bigger dude. It's hard to get your shoulders in between, the cabinets, the divider point and the edge of the cabinet and get up in there and actually be able to work. You have to kind of work on an angle. It's very difficult. So that also meant that I'd have to take off undo the hinges for the door. Okay, so let me get underneath the sink. Well, so then I try to go from one direction, try to get up inside of there. It's not possible. There's just not enough space. On the other side, there's a garbage disposal. So now I have to remove the garbage disposal, which means unhooking some of the plumbing underneath, or the drain pipes underneath the sink. So now I've removed the disposal, the drain pipes, and I've gotten myself enough space. I get up and underneath there, I'm trying to get my tool in there to loosen it, completely rusted out. The piece of metal that is, there was a nut that held the stem of the faucet that had completely rusted and it was not turning whatsoever. So now I have to figure out how to get this faucet to actually come off in a very small contained space on a timeline that that I already have kind of a tight timeline because I didn't dedicate a lot of time for this. And then in addition to that, I drove further than I normally would like to. So essentially we get underneath there. I ended up using a multi-tool. I'll skip forward through a lot of the non-super interesting stuff, but got underneath there with the multi-tool, basically had to cut it from up above in a very small space, was able to get it, but it took a long time. So a typical faucet repair typically takes me about 30 minutes. If I have plenty of space and it's not super contained, I can get in there and replace the faucet within 30 minutes. This one ended up taking about an hour and a half with everything involved. So as you can imagine, that was a lot more time than I had anticipated. Now, the other issue was that this was the second mistake that I made. I did not tell the customer a price up ahead. I told the customer, we always had an arrangement. I show up, I get paid for whatever I tell her that it is. She knew how much my hourly rate was, but I did not factor in that my hourly rate had changed from $90 to $120. So that was the first thing. I failed to communicate that to her. So then what ended up happening was she knew that this faucet was taking significantly more time than it needed to. It wasn't like she was on a tight timeline. It was more of she could tell that it was not going as smoothly as I expected it would. The problem is that when you're underneath that sink and you start seeing everything in the open, the question is, do you continue? Do you make time to take care of this task, or do you have to come back and do this a different time? That's like the internal debate that you have as, someone on site. The problem is that that was the main thing that she wanted to have taken care of, which is why I should not have waited until the last task to take care of that. I should have started that right away to make sure that there was enough time to get that done. The problem is that I spent time getting the other things done first, which then ultimately pushed it into even more time once I found out that there was issues and the faucet itself took more time. So the issue became, at that point, the main thing that she wanted to be completed was this faucet. If I'm not finishing the faucet, then she just basically paid me to do like a couple of real minor things. And the real minor things would not have totaled out to, my minimum that I typically would charge. So overall, there was a lot of different issues that were going on. The problem is that I don't like leaving customers in a situation where they feel like something wasn't taken care of, or what they really wanted done wasn't taken care of. I will go out of my way to make sure that that thing is taken care of. But again, it's because I made the mistake of structuring what I was taking care of in the order that they were being taken care of in. So that was the biggest problem. Once you decide you're going to get this done no matter what, you then have to adjust. If you have another job that's scheduled at a specific time, you're going to need to make adjustments for that. You might need to send a text and say, hey, just so you know, I'm running behind. I will still be there today. Or, hey, I'm running behind. Can we reschedule for a different day? I don't like doing the rescheduling thing. I'd rather just push it and then have to work later, because I don't want a customer who might have dedicated time for me to be there have to do that on a different day. I don't like when that happens, because I wouldn't like it if it happened to myself if I was hiring somebody to do something at my house. So the problem is that ultimately it took a lot longer, and there's a lot of cost that's involved. It's not just extra hours. It's not just, the blade on the oscillating tool that I completely dulled out by having to cut this stem. It's not the fact that there could have been another trip if I did it. That would have been a completely different scenario. It's more about the frustration. You get frustrated, and it's not a great situation. But the biggest problem that I ran into was not so much about the actual work. It was more about, at the very end, I told her how much it was, and she looked at me and was kind of like in shock. And I wasn't real sure why, because we had previously worked out, I just tell you how much it is and you give me the price. But I failed to remember that I had changed my hourly rate. And when you go from having an hourly rate of $90 to $120, that's essentially $30 extra dollars, an hour. If you're there for multiple hours, you're talking about a lot of money. So this job that I had hypothesized might have taken 2 hours, and I would have charged, before I would have charged 180. Then now I would have charged, it was like a 2.5 hour job at 120. That comes out to 300. That's a pretty big difference. $120, over cost is pretty big. But the other issue is that in addition to that, she didn't know how long it was going to take. And in most scenarios, when she had me out, she normally paid somewhere in the neighborhood of like $240. So that was a problem. And as soon as I told her how much it was, she kind of looked at me and was in shock, and then said, but wait, how much is the hourly rate? And I was like, oh, my hourly rate is 120. And she said, oh, I thought it was 90. And it was 90. I made the mistake of failing to tell her that rate had gone up, and that was my fault. So immediately she was unprepared for the increase in the hourly rate. She also probably was not aware that that I was going to have to end up spending as much time as I did doing what I needed to do to get that faucet done. This is one of the reasons why I have switched to flat price. This isn't the only reason, obviously, but these situations are one of the main reasons why I switched over to flat rate pricing for specific tasks. That's not to say that an unknown can't happen and you can't raise your price. But for the most part, you walk into most situations and you know it's going to be a certain price. I should not be penalized for having experience and being able to do something quicker. At the same time, I should also not penalize the customer for a scenario that they did not know, that I did not know either, because I chose not to. Meaning, if I would have gone to the customer's house and done an estimate in person, that would have cost time. My time, I look at it as it's a little bit more valuable than the off chance that there's going to be something that could be off with this job. So I typically will price a faucet replacement at about $180, and I can do some faucets, like I said, in 30 minutes, and in some cases it might be an hour and a half. It really just depends on the scenario, but that 180 basically is internally 1 hour and then a little bit of leeway. And that leeway allows for those off chances that something could be wrong. Now, that doesn't happen all the time. And I know that there's going to be some people who think that, well, then you're overcharging the customer if you're doing this every time you do a faucet. You're right. You could view it that way, but also the other way of viewing it is that the one-off time that there is something out of 10 faucets, if one of them ends up having an issue, that issue is covered by the extra amount of money that the other ones all pay for. And that's the way I view it. I am not trying to sit here and say that an individual customer should always be paying for somebody else's work, but that is collectively what we're doing as a trade business. You know, there are scenarios that happen where stuff takes a little bit longer, and you still have to have that stuff covered somehow. So the average still works out. If I take the overall average of hours that I am productive on site doing jobs, divide that by my revenue for the entire year to figure out how much money I actually have to charge people, that becomes a larger number every year if I'm not as productive because of these situations that I'm not factoring in. So that's the way I look at it. But the lesson from this specific scenario is that I didn't do a great job of communicating. I didn't do a great job of asking questions, and I made exceptions that I shouldn't have made when it came to the travel time and the scheduling issues. The scheduling issues and the drive time, those can be overlooked if you're in a scenario where the rest of it's frustration free. The problem is that wasn't the case. So I was already frustrated because of these other situations. And then on top of that, I walked into a scenario that was outside of anybody's control, including the customers. You can't take it out on the customer. To basically wrap up what ended up happening with that customer, I realized that I made the mistake of not telling her the new hourly rate, told her to pay me the old hourly rate, and I did lose a little bit of what I would typically charge somebody. But the customer wasn't unhappy in the end. The faucet was done. The other list of things that she wanted done were also completed, and she didn't pay more than what she thought she was. She did pay a little bit more because of the amount of time that it took, but she didn't pay the larger amount that I would have typically charged anybody else because of the hourly rate adjustment. So now, typically when that customer or any other customer gets in contact with me, I always make a point to say, what is it you need done? I give them a price. If I don't give them a written estimate, I will always give them an estimate via text. So that way there is no question about how much money I'm expecting to get paid when I'm showing up. Now, I do have a couple of other customers. These are well-established customers, and I'm talking about they've done lots of work with me. They don't ask about the cost. They just expect the invoice to be fair. If they give me a list of things to do, they want me to complete the list. They're not looking for an itemized estimate ahead of time. So that's something to keep in mind, is that you establish those customers and you know who those customers are very separately than the other customers. I don't have a ton of those. Those are more of customers I've established relationships with, and they're also professionals that have a certain level of income that that understand that things cost a certain amount of money. That's not an excuse to overcharge them. It's just you're able to fluctuate those jobs a little bit better. You're able to make sure that you have enough time to get the things that need to get taken care of done without having to rush because you're trying to be as efficient as possible. And that's great. But I only have probably 4 customer groups that fall under that specific category. And the majority of everybody else is, how much is this going to cost? Here's how much it is. And then, we move forward from there. So I hope that makes sense. And I would love to hear what you guys have, a situation where you guys have lost, a job that cost you money. I know that I titled the name of this video, The Job That Almost Cost Me Money. It did technically cost me money, but it's not that the job didn't make money. It made money. It just wasn't as much as I typically would charge. So it could have gone a completely different direction and things could have gone way worse. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that I always try to look back at these situations that can be presented in a negative light and just look at it from the perspective of, what can you learn from this? I learned a lot from that specific scenario. One, that was the first time I had a faucet where I actually had to cut the stem off, and I had to figure out how to do that. So those are things you just have to keep in mind and how to adjust when you need to adjust. The biggest thing that I would love to hear from you guys is, give me some scenarios where you guys had a job that almost cost you money, or cost you a little bit of money, but it wasn't as much as it could have been if the scenario went a little bit different. Love to hear stories from you guys. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. We've got new videos coming out every Monday and Thursday. And we have, if you take a look at the video, the end card now has our latest This Week in the Field, and then whatever the last video that we released for this specific series is. Like I said, we're going to try to, do a little bit more tools, because you guys have been watching a lot of the tool videos. We're also going to be doing some story-driven videos specifically designed for growing your business, but also videos for homeowners and what can be helpful as you create a relationship with your handyman as well. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Like I said before, like, subscribe, share the video, leave a comment below. Thank you to all the subscribers. We're on a nice little track. Every time I check the subscriber count, it's growing a little bit more, and I really appreciate everybody who's here taking a look. Love to interact with you guys in the comments, so be sure to check that out. With all that being said, this has been the Handyman in the Field. I'm Dustin, and we'll see you guys next time.